and answer session with a roundtable format, just to ask questions, get some information so that as council members, we can go out into the community and have some fact-based discussions with our constituents who have questions about the mall proposal that we'll be acting on next Tuesday, October 1st. And so where we left off, members were asking questions about the details of the proposal. Thankfully, our stakeholders, our representatives of both foundations and the Chamber have stayed with us tonight. So if there's additional questions for the proposers, also we have our staff team that's been involved in this negotiating process right along with us as well. So members, if you have any questions and you want to continue discussion, either with the stakeholders or amongst ourselves, we can certainly do that now. Ms. Tao, go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa. I have 3 questions, and my first question is that we have businesses in the mall today. I know we plan to be very aggressive once the entire acquisition or purchasing goes through, and I'd like to understand what will happen to some of those tenants. I'm sure there's some sort of agreement in place they have with the mall owner or whoever's managing the mall today, but can someone share with me what that outlook would look like for? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as it stands right now, the mall property, the center portion of the mall is occupied by 23 tenants. These leases, and they're essentially lease. A little bit of background: the city owns the ground underneath the entire mall. Somebody else owns all the buildings on top of it, except for the parking ramps. The person who owns all the buildings is leasing space in those buildings out to these various tenants. So it's a kind of a complicated structure, but that's essentially what we have here. Those 23 tenants currently, and we're excluding home furniture from this, those 23 tenants have different types of leases in place right now for the shops where they are. Most of these leases expire in less than a year, or they're on a month-to-month basis already. The reason that's the case is because the current owner, Rialto, has not been doing anything to try to establish a longer-term relationship with any of those tenants. So our plan right now is to try to stabilize that center portion of the mall with engaging in the folks who are currently there, because obviously we're going to need some revenue to operate this structure for a period of time. It's losing money right now. That's another reason why it's up for sale. And that's why we need some additional ongoing assistance from the city, because it's losing money currently. Our hope is to try to develop some type of relationship with these existing tenants, and presumably get them potentially into longer term, more stable relationships, depending on what our plan is for what we would envision happening with the structure. You know, it could be something like moving all of the tenants from the various spaces where they're all kind of scattered around inside there into one wing. And that would mean getting them all to agree to sign new leases in that other space. So the first step in this whole process, though, is making sure that they're comfortable dealing with us. To do that, we have to hire professional mall management, which is part of the agreement that we have in place. And right now we've been working with Rockstep Capital. We've interviewed the folks from Mid-American who are currently acting as the mall managers. Both of these folks are highly qualified to do that. We have to make a decision within the next 2 days as to which one of these folks we're going to be going with. But that's essentially the plan here, is to hire somebody who does this for a living to help run that, to run the mall itself while we continue to do our planning. So we're going to have kind of parallel tracks going on here. One is going to be acting as a mall owner and operator, and the other one's going to be trying to figure out what to do in the long run with that property. That what we do in the long run is going to inform how we manage that mall piece in the middle.
Okay. And I'm just asking because there are some small business owners that have invested capital into their businesses in the the area there. And so I hope that through your negotiations or discussions, I hope that if some of those tenants decide that they want to be outgoing, that there might be some kind of incentive for them, because this certainly complicates their business situation. Let's just say if that's the case, okay? But it sounds like you're going to make a concerted effort to perhaps have conversations with some of these tenants to see if there's a long-term partnership, if they would agree to whatever's decided down the road. I just want that to be considered and thought of.
Yeah, we've actually been encouraged by the folks that we've talked to so far who are the mall manager candidates to continue to engage with local entrepreneurs, because those tend to be folks who are more interested in leasing spaces like this in malls versus the big national tenants. You don't see, it's harder to get a national tenant to take down a lot of space in a facility like this because they just don't have the commercial need for it. But I think part of our consideration is is having the availability potentially to continue to foster the local entrepreneurs in that space.
All right, and then another question for you, Mr. Mella. On page 2, under city obligations, I circled this. It said, in the case of the so-called Sears property, WAS may establish a separate ownership entity to hold title. Can you explain that a little bit, elaborate on that for me?
Yes. At the time we had put that together, we weren't exactly sure how the ownership entity was going to be, and it's just a thing because of the fact that your three partners in this are private foundations, and we just needed to make sure we did the right things to protect the private foundations for their tax, to maintain their private foundation tax status. The Sears property has some environmental contamination in it, so there was some concerns about having WAS set up, and then the very first thing that WAS does is takes on a piece of property that has environmental contamination, because the risk associated with environmental cleanup goes along with whoever owns it. So the thought was, we may decide that we put Sears into a separate thing so that it protects all the money that we're all putting into this together from the environmental contamination cleanup. So that's why that's there.
Is that still the direction?
It's still a possibility. The reality is we've just signed up somebody to conduct the environmental investigation for the property. So once we get a better sense as to what things look like there and what the potential risk is, we may still decide to do that. But it's really just going to be driven by what the environmental consultant tells us.
So will this language still be in your term sheet with the city?
Yeah, I mean, the language will be there.
Okay.
But again, I think it's less likely that it's going to end up that way because of the financing structure we've talked about. We want the city's loan to go directly to WAS. The money from the foundations is going to go through the Chamber Foundation and come into WAS from a different direction. But that plan was to make sure that the city had the priority payback in the arrangement. So there's less of a chance we're going to have a separate entity sitting out there that owns this other piece of property because you're putting all this money into the one entity.
Okay. So the 1 million asked will go into the WAS LLC.
Correct.
The other contributions from the private funders will go into the Chamber Foundation.
No, it'll go into another entity owned by the Chamber. Oh, yes, yes, correct. Yep.
Okay.
And then the Chamber Foundation turns around and all the Chamber Foundation does is take that money and put it into WAS.
I like where all the liabilities lies into that one LLC.
Right, WAS is the
makes
thing
sense.
it's the easiest way to have one thing that manages what's going on there.
Okay. And I do have one last question. You can answer this or someone else. What's the fair market value of the entire property today?
Well, that's a really good question. I can tell you that I don't know.
It's just for the record.
I don't know, frankly. If you're looking at what the tax assessed value is, you might have to ask this.
I just want the fair market value if it's assessed today. Maybe not looking at the tax roll on it, but I just like to understand if someone was to come in and take a look at that 8 city block property, what's the current market value?
Well, considering
Maybe
that
we
we
can-
offered $3 million for it, and we had to offer more than anyone else was willing to offer for it, somewhere between $2.5 and $3 million, probably.
And I appreciate that. I think that part I understand. I just thought maybe somebody on city staff might have that information. But it's okay, if we don't get that information here, hopefully we can follow up and get that
Well, and we
information.
kind of asked a similar question in our initial meeting where we were looking at, in terms of a real estate transaction, the fair market value is what anyone is willing to pay for it, like Mr. Mellis said. But, I think that if we were to ask the assessor what a fair market value for an area that size is, next to a flourishing business district, he may have a totally different opinion. I mean, we have it assessed somewhere around $10 million, so, right? Or 20? 12 million, Mary Ann says. So, somewhere between there probably lies the real value, and I think the fact that the mall has been in decline certainly plays into its taxable value, but, if you were going to look at it for some totally different purpose and say, what is, 8 square blocks of a bustling downtown worth? That's probably a whole lot more than $3 million.
Right, it's
So-
just worth noting and worth understanding. I
Yes.
think that, if, given the declining situation with the mall, I get it.
Yep.
It's going to be worth 2.5, 3 million to the highest bidder. But it's just important to know the true economic value of that property if it wasn't in the type of market condition that it's in today. So maybe the assessor's office, well, we'll take the
Maybe.
12 million,
Maybe.
right? that
Well,
Mary
we
Ann
we
shared.
hope to unlock some of that value with some of the planning that we do, but right now, with the way it's locked up with the current structures and everything that's there, it's worth what we're offering for it.
Right, thank you.
So, excellent, thank you. Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, you notice I have a blue light, and sometimes in the heat of, ongoing discussion, I'll pop on my blue light because I want to talk, and then, somebody says something or answers what I was thinking, and so I turn off my blue light, and that's fine. In the wake of the discussion earlier, before we took our break tonight, I noticed Mr. Stubbe had his arm up for a moment. I just wanted to offer anybody of the gentlemen here, if you have anything that you heard or are concerned about or want to say in the wake of the earlier discussion, please feel welcome to come up too.
Well, thank you. Actually, my thoughts kind of rose when Mr. Peckham made some observations, and then Mr. Smith followed up with that. And, sometimes we get into all of the technical dialogue, which is, I was a tax guy when I was working with Whiffley, and I was used to being real technical, but when I got together with my clients, I needed to bring things to a summary type level that they could understand what I was advising. And a lot of times we get in here, now we're getting, when it got into how it's going to be, how the city's going to orchestrate this with the tax incremental financing, the big picture gets lost a little bit. And I think everyone understands the vision that the foundations have. We're not interested in trying to figure out how to make money for the foundations. We're trying to save this property for the benefit of the city. And the concept of the city's putting in $1 million, the idea is, well, what does this look like if it's successful? And if it's successful, that means that there's going to be lots of new types of businesses there. Might be mixed use, might be combination of office, residential, retail. We don't know what that's going to look like. We've actually had some preliminary discussions, and there was a couple of city employees there yesterday with people that do this urban planning, and particularly in distressed mall environments, but they haven't done one in a downtown area. But my point that I wanted to make is that the city, and Chris Schock then also made this comment, the city's loan is really ahead of everybody else. If it doesn't go well and we can't make things go and we got to sell it, the proceeds are going to go to the city, the first $1 million. But that's not the plan. The plan is to have something successful, and chances are these development projects, to make them work, they're going to take, the buyer or the developer is not going to be willing to pay much for the property, if anything. And so that means that there be a transfer unencumbered of the property for the right development project that will create a tax base for the city. Where I could see the city having some investment would be the traffic routing around those properties, Forest Street becoming two-way traffic, maybe Washington Street two-way traffic, whatever, that whole design was designed for getting people into the mall through parking. Well, if it's going to be demalled or changed, there may be some commitments that the city needs to do in routing traffic. But the key thing here is what the city is only really putting the $1 million in if it's successful. And that comes back and pays back in spades, and that's what we want. So that's what I wanted to pass along.
Yep, thank you for that. Anyone else want to offer comment? Mr. Friels, do you have any? No? Okay. Mr. Ackman, come on up.
Thank you. My name is Dave Eckman. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if you know this about me, but I sold my house in Rothschild, and now I live downtown. And it's a special place. I see it every day. Twice a day I walk my dogs throughout the city, on the river. There's a lot of good things happening here. A lot of good things. We're on the cusp. And if you've not seen the economic development plan, and why I bring this up, in terms of having some vision and of what we can be and what we can become in this community and what downtown can become. We hired TIP Strategies a year ago, embarked on a process a year ago with a firm that has national exposure and experience with communities like ours in the United States and throughout the world. They're highly regarded. And if you look at the three goals, talent, innovative companies, and placemaking, you really start to get understanding of what we have to do as a community, as a greater Wausau region. But the placemaking aspect, first two tactics in placemaking, one, urban vitality, and riverfront in this city. Focus on this economic opportunity in this city. And when they came in here and they saw what was going on here, they realized the untapped potential of things that we can live towards and create for our community. This mall is at the center point of that. The mall is a linchpin that goes down the 3rd Street towards the towers and the South River. It's pivotal. And when I got a call from the chamber, from the foundations, asking if we would participate as a partner in the role that we will play, I was honored. You couldn't ask for a better set of organizations. And when I say that, I'm not talking about the Chamber Foundation, but I'm talking about these two foundations and what they've done historically for this community and what they will continue to do. And so I'm just urging you that take a look at the plan, because this plan was released in March, not just last week, not a month ago, but in March. And it outlined, it almost foresaw what was to be. And here we now have the opportunity that doesn't come along, but maybe a decade, to take a property and reposition it in a partnership to build a better Wausau. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Peckham.
Yeah, I don't know who could answer this, but I'm just wondering, just to throw a idea out, is this going to be, in terms of the businesses that are going to come in here, is this going to be kind of like the old homesteading days where if you were a good farmer, you would be given 40 acres and turned loose? Or is it conceivable on the other end of the spectrum that the properties that are being acquired would yield enough purchase money that there would be 3.5 million in revenues? And if there would, we got 3 million, if purchasers would pay 3.5 million for all the sliced pieces sliced up 5 ways, who gets the extra?
It's a nice thought, but I wouldn't expect that. And all you have to do is look back in the history of the city, and you own Sears today. What's happened there? You've had people come and say, we need to have you give us the land knock down the building, and we'll build a movie theater, and by the way, we'll only do a very short lease, so the person, they don't want to own it, they want someone else to own it, and it doesn't happen. So it's, what we're going to try to look at is, we're going to face the same headwind you did with Sears. It's not going to be an easy process. It's going to be very, very difficult. But what we need in this community long-term, we all know what we need, and it's more people living and working downtown. We're a very small percentage of residents living downtown in this city, much, much smaller than, what anyone would like to target. So that's what we would hope to see. As people living and working, will they be living in the mall? Probably not. Will they be wanting to live on the riverfront? Absolutely, that's spectacular. And all that we're trying to do is enhance the developments that we have going right now. And it's really, some things have been stalled. There's no question, but we've moving very fast on the riverfront now. And it's just a very special place to be. So, just think of the mall like it's what you've gone through. It's Sears. It's just bigger. It's not going to be easy. And, but we're looking out, 15 and 20 and 25 years. We're not a developer that's saying, oh my, I got to make this thing cash flow today. I got to make it better tomorrow because I have all of these investors. We're an investor for the community, not for a return. So, thank you.
Thank you for that. Anyone else have questions that they feel they need answers, or questions they've received from residents that they need answers that they can go out and give? As far as factual answers, tidbits that you don't have answers to that we need to source from the folks that we have with us tonight? Or do we feel that we're in a good enough position to weigh out the information we have and come back next week and make that decision? If we feel like we've talked it well enough. Mr. Peckham, go ahead.
Sorry, as long as you invited this, I did have a citizen during the break ask if a developer shows interest in this property. People are a little gun shy of developers that talk a mean ballgame but might not be able to follow through. Who's going to evaluate the developer's proposals and make sure we don't have another Mike France thing happen?
Well, the way we had discussed it, the WAS itself is going to have a very small management structure with a board of advisors, and that would be the group that would be conducting the evaluation. So you've got the foundations with their goals for the city of Wausau and the community, the people who are primarily analyzing those things, along with, frankly, if we think we need more help, we're going to hire additional help conducting any additional evaluations that we need to conduct. Gary's got a career in banking, and Jeff's got a career in accounting, and they're dragging me along for the lawyer stuff.
Well, and in parallel, on that same subject, in parallel with that, I would think that as projects materialize where you suspect that based on the structure of the deal that, another public ask or a public-private partnership is to be brought forward, we'd follow the same process we've always followed with that, where our economic development and finance committees would engage with the proposer and with our advisory board and with our stakeholders to determine what the return on that investment is, how long the payback is out there, what percentage of participation we would represent, and then evaluate those case by case. But, we certainly would have a seat at that table as well to make those decisions as they come forward. I mean, assuming that they may come one project at a time. I don't know that anybody's, if someone was out there looking for a 6-square block square footage, they'd already be here. So we may see these things come in, a series of small projects, but, maybe that's how we want them. Because, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So this is a big project for us. Okay. Mary, go ahead.
Before we had our recess earlier, I had made the request to Mary Ann to provide us the financial status of the three
three TIDs?
districts. Will we be able to get that information in advance of the October 1 meeting and really understand what the opportunity costs would be if we select one TID over the other, because I did read a couple of the plans that that has been developed for each TID. I just want to know how those are impacted, but if you can include that in your,
So
in
have
your
her
summary.
produce the financials from each TID, which that,
I'd like to understand the current situation of each TID, 3, 12, and 8, and if we pursue moving the 2016C funds or leftover remaining funds to TID 8,
Yep.
I want to understand what that long-term projection would look like. What are the, whether they're positive impacts or negative impacts, I just need to understand, because it's got, like a 20-year life cycle on TID 8. I don't know where we're at. I know you provide this information like earlier in the year, but if we can just get a refresh, that's important for me to be
yep,
able to.
and maybe we could
look
ask her
over.
also to put together a staff memo that narrates that a little bit, like she does when she presents it to finance, because she puts the report out there in terms of a spreadsheet, but then explains it to us in real terms.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be helpful for all of us to digest, if you could do this, a similar narrative to what we did with our TID review in finance.
And
But-
if you're going to recommend TID 8 as a financial instrument that we're going to use to make this happen, then maybe just tell us like 3 to 4 bullets, like why you're recommending this one, why it's the best option. I know you did that in the summary, but any additional information, because I just want to be able to put it out there. If people ask me questions, if I support something, I just want to be able to say, here you go, here's what we talked about, and here's how our city and our citizens will be impacted in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
And that's happening. I think a number
Thank
of
you.
us have found out that everywhere we go, people are asking now. I mean, for the last 2 years, everywhere you go, somebody goes, well, what's going to happen with Wausau Center? And we had to say, I don't know. But now, there's actually a direction, that we can choose to pursue. And so now that it is in the news cycle again, that, there's some options for, what we can do. It's kind of a this or that type thing, but that discussion has reinvigorated. And I think amongst our neighborhood groups, and, even when you run into people out in the street, they want to know what that all means. And so I think it's good that we have this discussion and that we have some information to put out there. So does anyone else have additional questions for any of our stakeholders or any of the staff members about this matter? If not, I would encourage you, if questions come up, if you get questions that you're not sure of the answers to, if it's something that we know that our staff can answer, contact Chris and Mary Ann right away so they can get you the answers before October 1st. Reach out to them anytime. I know Chris has invited us multiple times to either stop and see him or call him, email him, whatever needs to be done, and he'll work with you to get your questions answered and get answers for your people. So,
President Rasmussen,
Yep.
also just if there are other questions from any of the alderpersons with respect to this, both Gary and Jeff have indicated that be happy to meet with you individually if you'd like to discuss any of these matters with them as well.
okay, so take advantage of that opportunity as it's available. Thank you, stakeholders, for staying with us and devoting your entire evening to hanging out with us, even through the council meeting, so we appreciate that. The Committee of the Whole has one more item to discuss tonight, and it's CIP. And you'll recall a few months ago, we delegated our CIP review process to the CIP committee, who heard presentations from all of the departments and reviewed all of those. We ranked all of the requests, which was a tedious task we all used to do. And so we went through those machinations, figured out how much money we expect we're going to have, and then we started to prioritize projects based on critical need. And so the list that's in your packets is the list that we came up with. And we promised that we would bring our list, our work product, back to the Committee of the Whole, just to have you get a look at it and verify, whether there's any questions as far as why we made the choices we made as a committee. Gary and I were the two alder people on that, and Dave Nutting was as well. He's not with us this evening, but we had some great roundtable discussion. And you can see on the spreadsheet where the red line is drawn is where we run out of money. We were able to fund a good portion of the projects. Some of those projects have been waiting for some time. Some of them are items that we may have grant funding pending for, and some of these things have reached a condition where they're kind of beyond repair. That was the situation with Metro Ride's floor scrubber. You see that in there. But we have looked at a few key things. The fire department submitted a project for renovation of Central Station Number 1 to extend the life of that facility. And there was two parts to that project. One part was some renovations to their office space on the main level, and the other was a renovation to the living quarters. The living quarters was in way worse shape I mean, even from a plumbing standpoint, that needed more urgent work. And so to phase that project in over 2 years, we allocated $100,000 this year to get the living quarters up to where it needs to be. And the remaining project would be deferred off for next year's CIP, because the office space, there's people that are co-working. And while that's annoying, it's certainly way less annoying than having your living quarters not function. And so that's why we promoted that project. We had a couple that are multi-phased projects. The GIS aerial photography is a multi-year implementation. We've got a few pieces of equipment that are nearing end of life, EMS monitors and extrication equipment for fire. Playground equipment, we, for a number of years, chose to cut and not fund playground equipment, and now some of that equipment has kind of reached a point where it's at end of life, and some of that stuff is not as ADA compliant either as we would want it to be. And so playground equipment kind of won out. And then we also looked at the chiller replacement within City Hall. That would be funded with borrowing because it has a very long lifespan, that item. And we also looked at the same thing with the patch truck carport over at DPW. But with that, we have, I think, most of the people that were involved in CIP are here. We have Eric's with us, Mary Ann's here, Gary and I are here. We have a few department heads still left with us. But, I think if you guys are supportive of these choices, the way these shook out, we would then recommend to the Finance Committee that these be included in the 2020 budget. Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to bring it to everybody's attention, and I hope that we can do some switching around here a little bit to move an item above the red line, that being the Wausau Dog Park. You'll see there a $25,000 ask was listed. Other funds shows $5,000. In fact, right now, the other funds that we have received are in excess of $35,000. Effectively, we're looking to have the city cover about 18 or 19% of the cost of this park, with donations covering the other 80% and we intend to follow through that. Our aim is to have a new city park next summer. A new city park. Playground equipment has been an ongoing thing, but there's $95,000 up there, and I'm proposing to shave from that in order to make that Wausau Dog Park number come up above the red line. The playground equipment thing has been an ongoing, I know, and it's something we're beholden to do over time, but we also have flexibility, and we've used our flexibility for 4 or 5 years now at least on that, to do what we can when we can, and so we're not, our feet aren't to the fire on that item, so it's not an all or nothing at all up there. That has flexibility. I would sure like to see something that was the result of a grassroots effort by citizens that came forward expressing a need and got involved and worked and researched and met and joined the mayor's special committee, have met regularly, have reached out to potential donors. We've had participation from area foundations. I expect more of the same, but I don't see our full, boat to be covered by that. That's why there is a city ask here. It seems to me eminently doable to move that dog park above the red line by sharing the wealth with the playground equipment budget.
So then your recommendation would be to reduce playground equipment to $75,000.
To 70, if 25, the ask is 25.
They had 5 in donations, it said, so 20 was what the CIP ask was? That's what the committee was
20 is the
asked?
ask? That's
20 was
fine.
the ask.
That's
So
fine.
if we would move up that dog park and then shave playground equipment to
To
75, Okay. And then obviously, this committee makes a recommendation to finance that would make the changes as a standing committee. So is that in the form of a motion then to make that amendment?
Yes, and I will just add, before I finalize my motion, that, it's been our expressed, I don't want to say promise, but intention to donors that have donated and potential donors, that our goal is opening
Yep.
summer of 2020.
To get them some results sooner than
Not 2021
later.
or 2022, or whenever we get around to it.
Yep.
So we're putting the pedal to the metal, and this seems like an eminently doable thing to help us get there. So that's my motion.
Okay. Do we have a second for Tom's motion then? For that change? Mr. Peckham? And then you have a comment? Go ahead.
Not necessarily on this. We can
Oh, okay.
let this run and
Okay.
then take me.
Let's vote on this, and this motion then would be to make a recommendation to the Finance Committee to amend the 2020 CIP to make the changes that Tom discussed. Reduce playground equipment to 75 and include the 20,000 for the dog
I
park.
think the idea is admirable, and I thank the councilman for coming up with that approach.
Okay? Do you want to speak to this, Gary, first before we vote?
Well, I
Go
just
ahead.
I don't have the book in front of me, Lisa, if you could just inform the city council with regard to that ask from the park department.
For the
I think,
playground?
For the playground, I
It was
think that
it was
included the
specific
forest.
facilities. Let me look once and see.
It included the specific request for the Forest Park neighborhood. And I think that was the one, I know that there are several other parks throughout the city that are continuing to deteriorate, and I think Forest Park was the one for this year,
Yes.
for 2020.
Yep, 2020 was Forest Park. Now, I know in the past, when we have had to cut out of playground equipment, what's happened is that the park department has been asked to work with the funds that they were given to achieve a result. And one of the things that Jamie had mentioned in her presentation that she wanted to use in this park was poured-in-place play surface, which is what you see at the Riverfront Park, which has been very well received. And it lasts longer, and I think even for, as a landing point off equipment, it's a little bit safer than bark chips and those rubber things and whatnot. So, I don't know how far, we don't have her with us, we don't know how far she can get for 75,000, but one thing we could ask of them also, and what we always do with our CIP, is if we realize either project savings in other areas, or if we need to go back to that list and see what else we can accomplish, with some funds that we have left at the end of the process, we certainly could earmark those funds to potentially restore that funding to that park. There's been complaints about the condition of Forest Park from some of its residents, and I know that Gary's been hearing that, and I've heard some of it as well, that equipment needs attention and the picnic area just needs some love, and so this would be satisfactory to those folks to get that done, but, we certainly could ask Jamie.
Right, I think we need to know exactly what this means to the effect of that playground, because playground, I think the new, the new ground, the new port in place, I think things are getting, I think we've been really trying to make the round, we have a lot of parks in this community, and I think we've been trying to make the rounds of all the parks so that all the neighborhoods are modernized to bring, and that Forest Park, I think, is really, really behind. So I would be,
Maybe what we could do, I guess, if we pass Tom's motion, because it's going to be a recommendation to finance, is between now and then, between the time we get to finance with this, is we could have Mary Ann reach out to Jamie with the proposed change, and have Jamie attend that meeting and talk to us about that impact and see how far she could get, and, if she's got some ideas for how we can get where we need to be, if we fund it a little short.
because
Could certainly ask.
I'm hesitant at this point, but I will go along with the recommendation, but I certainly will be watching, I think, as we go forward, because I'm really sensitive to that Forest Park, and so we'll
Makes
see where
sense.
we go.
Makes sense. Mr. Mayor?
Just for the record, Jamie is out of town this week for a conference. She
Okay.
will be back next week.
Would we
Just
be
letting you know.
considering this at the next finance meeting as part of our budget discussions? Because we've got a series of
Yeah, it would
finance
be
meetings
the
coming.
Finance meetings
Okay.
the budget meetings. We could put it on next meeting, though.
We could, just to consider.
Sure.
Yeah, because that'll be coming up on the 10th?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in between there, we'll have Mary Ann reach out to Jamie and see what the impact would look like. Mr. Peckham?
I still want to talk about some other stuff, but
Well, should we vote on this first and then take that up?
not quite yet.
Okay.
Sorry. I think I heard a message from Mary Ann within the last week that we look to finish 2019 in pretty good stead budget-wise. And maybe we could just say, if we do finish with some extra money, the first of that is available would go back into that playground equipment and make that.
Oh, you could do that.
For some surplus, you mean? Assuming
Yeah.
that winter is kind in
so
November
that
and December?
Right now, we're utilizing 20,000 of that to make sure that the dog park happens, but that as soon as some surplus funds are identified as 2019 closes out, that we go back and fund that playground equipment as we should.
Right, we could include that in our recommendation to finance if that's amenable to you and Mr. Neal. And then when finance takes it up, they could certainly hold a placeholder, if that surplus matures like we think. That's
I think
just
that'd be a good
assuming,
way.
we don't know what the snow deal is going to be for the late fall, but
And would that, just for clarification, would that proceed or take priority over the seal coat budget? Because, we've been amending the seal coat budget every year with surplus. So, because we had fallen so far behind in our seal coating of the city streets. So the
I
last.
think 20,000 of it would.
Okay.
right, we still want to infuse it, but maybe we'd have to compromise this year on it and see.
just asking for
Well,
clarification.
right, and we'll let finance make that call too and see how much we can get done with the seal coat that we've got planned. And if that 20,000 would really put us in a bind, then we'd have to think it over differently. Okay, so with that, then, it kind of sounds like one motion to change the playground equipment to 75, bump up the dog park with a recommendation to finance that they then analyze the impact with the Parks Director, and then look for 2019 surplus to fill the void if we can find it. Do I have it right?
I love it.
Okay. Further discussion then? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed? None are opposed. So that motion will go forward as a recommendation to the Finance Committee. Go ahead, Pat.
Thank you. I just need some explanation on a couple of these items, and I will acknowledge the difficulty the folks had in sorting all this out. The one line says patch truck carport, DPW streets, 47,030, and then there's another 47,030, and this is borrow with chiller. What's the chiller got to do with the carport?
Can you walk us
Or-
through that, Mary Ann? Because we talked about the lifespan of both
Sure.
items.
So there was discussion regarding the chiller and regarding that patch truck carport. Both were considered to be necessities when we were evaluating, but of course, we were running short of funds, and so the line, of course, was higher because we were trying to say what we were going to fund out of the current levy. Brian Barkowiak, our maintenance person, indicated that the last chiller lasted 22 years or something like that, and so, we issued 10-year notes, so it would be appropriate to fund it over a 10-year period since it has a 20-plus year life. And, of course, we're going to get quite a bit of energy efficiency with a new chiller than we have with our existing chillers. So there was additional incentive to make that change because of the improvement to our operating budget. So the committee made a decision to move that into the 2020 borrowing plan. And then the patch truck port, that is something that needs to be in a heated area or someplace that's protected from the environment because it's holding the patch, the black asphalt goo, whatever you
That
call
has
it.
to
I'm
stay
not an
hot.
engineer, so
Yeah.
I don't know what that stuff is called, but anyhow. They have problems during the winter in current conditions when it's out in the open because it's not warm enough for them to actually get it so that it's workable. So since that, again, would be an asset that would last, 30-plus years, being an actual building, we recommended that we would borrow for those two items.
Very good.
So that's why they're
I
together.
think it's great that the chiller, looks like that's happening. I believe it was on last year's budget and didn't happen, but it's good that that is. Wondering if the entire council could be told a little bit, there's a huge chunk of change here, $560,000 was requested for financial HR system replacement, and the size of that number, how are we ever going to do that? I mean, looking at the rest of the numbers, I mean, it's a large hill to climb.
It is a large hill to climb. Jerry Klein has told us that most likely it would be a 2-year project. They already have made a decision to hire a consultant to help actually craft the RFP. So when we looked at how long it was going to take, most likely to get through just the process of determining what our needs are and then the RFP, we felt that the likelihood that we would, and then, if they go through the selection process by the time a contract was ready, most likely that would not be until the very end of 2020, if that. And so we felt that perhaps we could delay funding until 2021. This is one of those situations where the city and the county and CCITC all use that same software package. The county is really clamoring for new software, probably louder than the city is. Certainly, the current software is not as efficient as new software packages would be, but the county seems to struggle with it. Its performance in the county environment is much poorer than it is for us as far as just like when they're using it, it
Workarounds and
times
things?
out
Oh.
and things like that for them. So they really are clamoring for new. So anyhow, and we also discussed the timing of the likelihood that we would both implement in the same year probably wouldn't take place. That, even when we do updates to the software, typically they do the county and then they do the city, or they choose to do the city first and then the county. We don't do them at the same time because it's just too much work for, our group or the consultant group. So we felt that there was going to be enough time, but again, it's one of those things where if we funded it over 2 years, it would be 2021 and 2022. And it will be a commitment. The other point I would make is, we're trying to move off of what the server that hosts what we call land records, which is a homegrown software package. And that server at one time served all of our land records systems, so, how we generate our tax bills. It also served social services, it served municipal court, it served our community development loan software, our special assessment software, a variety of software. And they just recently, I think September 4th was when the new land records software went online. And that was probably a year behind. But now that is the last piece that the county's using. So now IT is saying that that server, they're going to bill just to the city because we still have our municipal court software on there and our community development loan software on there. And that's like a $30-some thousand bill that we're going to have to pay versus co-shared with the county. And so we were highly motivated to move municipal court and the special assessment off of that system in 2020, so we gave that higher priority. And we actually funded the community development software 2 years ago, but again, IT has so many projects that it's hard for them to get them done in a timely basis. So we felt that funding these two and the work that they had to do to actually get us ready to actually purchase financial software, that we would be okay.
Right.
By delaying it
We've had issues
1 year.
before where we've earmarked software upgrades, and it takes them 8 or 10 months even to get the product lined up, and then they've done no, not even gotten to the testing phase yet. And in the meantime, that money sits tied up, and it's doing nothing for the community. And with their workload being what it is, and the fact that the implementation of something that big was going to be really long, we thought we would save ourselves a $30,000 bill and get rid of these other two. So we gave them $180,000 worth of software approvals to get rid of that, thinking that we could wait on these other two.
But the 560,000, that's strictly the city's share.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and then, thank you for that. And the shooting range training facility, I thought we had the money for that.
Well, storage building. You built an evidence storage building?
Building,
Yep, evidence storage.
yeah.
They want a shooting range facility also built on the same site. Right now, they're shooting at the town of Maine, at the 3M property, that is the range that they've always
Yeah.
used. And so the money that was requested for this in the presentation was not to build the range specifically. It was for some site prep and some planning activity. And the idea was that we would fund them, roughly $75,000 a year for a series of years, so they can do as much work as they can get done for that money and then stop. And then the next year, do as much as they can get done for that money and stop. But they figured that the core need for the changeover on any range is probably 5 years out. So they had some time, and knowing that we just paid for the evidence building, which was way more expensive than we planned, we thought that we would wait on the range and let
Okay.
them continue at
So they're going to
3M.
be seeing that again.
Yes, and their relationship with 3M is decent, and it's not an emergency. So we held that. So, go ahead, Gary.
Well, just, there, if you look down the list of the things not
You
Oh,
gotta
flip your
flip
mic on, I don't think it came on.
if there's just a lot of things looming. We've looked at the seawall for a long time, and hopefully, we're able to keep Memorial Park, stable. The parking lot at Sylvan Hill is going to be turning to gravel if you don't I'm just pointing at the fact that there's just a lot of things, the airport, there's just a lot of things looming that are expensive, and future city councils and future budgets are going to have to be dealing with it. It's looming, but we have to take care of the city. So these are not idle or wishful things on this list, but they will have to be dealt with in the near future, and they're expensive, and we have to carefully take a look at these.
Right?
That's the way we came out of the meeting, but,
It was. We wanted to be cautious with, how much more debt we incur. We try not to incur on stuff like this any more than what we retire. I mean, we try to retire on a fast schedule on a 10-year, but, could a person borrow more money and do more stuff on the list? Absolutely, but then that changes your debt picture for the negative, and that already has become a buzzword out in the community. And so our goal is to, borrow for capital projects the amount that we've traditionally borrowed, and try to keep that debt repayment and that borrowing in check and still get the work done. So that was kind of how we walked out of CIP, knowing that we want to, I think every year, we all want to get more done, and we want to check more stuff off the list. But I think we got further down on the list than we thought. When we walked into CIP originally, the list was drawn at the top, and we had to shift some stuff around to even get to the point where we are, where we can fund 633,000 of those projects, because we started out depressed in the first moment when we realized that the red line was above the first project. So if that isn't discouraging, if that isn't discouraging, we didn't know what was. But after a little roundtable, we got to where we are today, so.
But with the good news, everybody
ahead.
came together and got it taken care of, and we're moving forward.
Indeed.
I always like to be positive and optimistic, but it's the truth and it's realistic.
Okay.
Got to move it forward like
True.
we have.
And, without any additional amendments to this list, then this list will go forward to finance, and they can make the changes that we asked for, and then incorporate it into the budget. And in October, you'll notice on the city calendar, there's a series of finance meetings coming. Those are the budget sessions where we actually consider the departmental budgets and the requests, the cost to continue, and then we look at new requests. And is there 3 of those meetings coming? The first week of October. So mark your calendars, and if you're able to attend, everybody is welcome to attend those and offer feedback and be part of that process. So it'll feel like finance meets an awful lot in October, but hopefully we can get the heavy lifting of the budget done and be ready to ratify in November. So, all right, absent anything else, a motion to adjourn would be appropriate. Motion from Herbst, second by Martins. Members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.